Hi, this is Jim, and I want to focus on the construct of a day as it relates to the Moedim, or the appointed times of Scripture, and for all those who are seeking to keep the day accordingly, the various Sabbaths, and to follow the instructions of the appointed times. So let me get started here. The construct of a day. Well, first of all, I think we need to define the components of a day. And in each day, there are four parts. There is a daytime, and then there's a twilight in the west that we call evening, and there's a twilight in the east that we call morning, and then there is a nighttime. And let's define each of these. When we define daytime, this is the period of time where the sun is literally seen in the sky. It starts from sunrise, when the sun first crests the horizon in the east, and it continues through until the sun sets and disappears on the horizon in the west. So at the last moment that you can see the sun before it disappears is the last moment of daytime. And then we enter a twilight period. And when you get into the definition of a twilight, this is the period of time where the sun is no longer visible in the sky, but its light is. Twilight in the west, which we call evening, most commonly we refer to that as evening, begins when the sun has disappeared past the horizon, but its light continues to be seen behind it. And it ends when the sunlight fades and disappears altogether. And then you have twilight in the east, which we call morning, and that begins when the sunlight begins to appear once again in the eastern sky as the sun is approaching that horizon in the east. It ends when the sun actually crests the horizon in the east. So when the sun crests the eastern horizon and once again appears. Nighttime is the period of time where there is neither sun nor its light visible in the sky. So neither sun nor its light can be seen in the sky. And I would like to take opportunity to differentiate, because we have introduced so many problematic words into this discussion, because I think we need to be specific. Twilight is the period of time where there is sunlight but no sun, and that needs to be contrasted against evening and morning, which are the most common ways to reference both of those periods. Other words used for the twilight period is dawn in the morning and daybreak in the morning. Both of those, when you look them up, are a period of time where the sunlight appears, but the sun has not yet. And then you have dusk and sundown in the evening, both of which the sun has disappeared, but not its light fully. Each of these are describing twilight. But evening and morning, which we commonly refer to them as, they include the twilight, both include the twilight, but both also can have broader definitions that can vary by audience, context, and purpose. When we think of the evening, does it start at 6 p.m.? Does it begin when the sun remains in the sky? Because I think some are going to have to, when they start trying to employ certain definitions of days and reckoning of day to the atonement and other things, they're going to have to begin evening while the sun is still up, while it still is above the horizon, even if only partially. Does it go past dusk and into the night? Does it end when one goes to bed? I think many people think of that way, because sometimes people, they're staying up, they're watching TV, and they continue to watch TV. The sunlight completely disappears, especially in the winter months, completely disappears, and we're at nighttime, they go to bed, but they're referencing that entire period of time of, evening. It just will vary. In the morning, when we define morning, does it start at 6 a.m.? Specifically, whether the sun is up or not, just like with evening at 6 p.m., whether the sun is down or not? Does it continue past sunrise? Does it end at 12 p.m.? Because in our world today where I live, morning is from the time that the sunlight appears in the sky, which is really dawn and daybreak, all the way to noon. So at 10 a.m., we're still calling that morning. But is that literally morning? You can see that the The definition of morning and the definition of evening can be problematic because it's so broad and so varied in their meanings, whereas twilight is very specific. It's the period of time where there's sunlight but no sun. Let's take a moment to study the Hebrew word that is driving the conversation of evening here, and it's the word ereb. Well, here's how it looks. This is the Hebrew version of it, and this is the transliterated Hebrew transliteration of this Hebrew word, ereb. If you go to Bible study tools, they give us 3 definitions. The first one is they define it as evening, sunset, and night. And the second one, they give us the definition of mixed, interwoven, mixture, mixed people, mixed company. The third definition is lying in wait, covert, lair, and den. Let me quickly just show you those 3 options inside of Bible study tools just very quickly. So here's its first meaning, and you can see it up here because it's giving us this ereb. And the first meaning that they provide for ereb is evening, night, sunset. And the second meaning they give us, which you can identify up here as ereb 2, is this idea of mixed, interwoven, knitted material, woof. They're showing us the definition of woof, or the word woof, as mixed, interwoven, knitted material, and mixture, mixed people, mixed company. You get the idea. And then they give us a third definition of ereb, which is this idea of lying in wait, and secondarily covert, lair, and den. All right, and then let's take a look at Strong's definition. And first of all, let me just correct myself because I was saying ereb, but it's actually pronounced areb, apparently, according to the various pronunciations I'm finding in these various places. So it's areb, not ereb. But in Strong's, they're defining it as evening in Strong's number 6153, and then they define it as den, lie in wait, in Strong's number 695. Let's take a quick moment to look at those. So here is Strong's 6153, and they're showing us that areb, they just tell us evening here. Areb, evening. And then they give us the Hebrew word that it's a noun, masculine noun. Transliteration is areb. Pronunciation is areb. Phonetic spelling areb. Then the King James Version tends to treat it as a plus day, even, evening tide, night. The NASB tends to translate it as evening, twilight, evenings, night, every evening, sunset. And then they say that the word origin is from 6150, which is close. Let me go take a quick look at that. Okay, so here is 6150 that they're saying is arav, which means close, evening, turns to gloom. Here's the Hebrew word. It's a verb. Transliteration is arav. I guess that's the pronunciation, arav. The spelling is arab. In the King James, they're translating as be darkened toward evening. NASB is close, evening, turns to gloom, word origin. And then verse 1 is to grow dusky at sundown. So we have a reference here to sundown. If you look up sundown, this is the period of time. This is that twilight period I was talking about. The sun has gone down, but the sunlight remains and it grows dusky. And so according to Strong's, this is what Arav is trying to convey. This idea that the sun has gone down, we have no sun but sunlight, and it's growing dusky. Let's return to evening here, and then the Strong's definition, they leave it at dusk. And what's the definition of dusk? Dusk is actually, they'll get more specific. Dusk is the darkest part of twilight, but it's still twilight. The sun is gone. It's not there, but the sunlight is still there. Dusk is the very last part of it. So Strong's is saying that evening, even though they're calling it evening, they're referring to it as dusk here. And then they do give us that secondary word, for areb, where we've got areb, and it's being used as den, lie in wait by the King James. It's being translated as lair, lie in wait by the NASB. And, excuse me, Strong's is saying that's for, that the definition is ambuscade. Okay, so let me return to Strong's 6153, where we have areb being defined as evening or dusk here. And let's move on down to where we get to all the uses of areb. Here is areb. But I want you to notice how many different related words are appearing throughout Scripture that are similar to Areb. And the one we're going to focus on in a moment is this, Harbaim, where we have 11 occurrences. But in this particular case, we have Areb. We have 18 occurrences. Let's go there very quickly. And here we're seeing 18 occurrences where we have Areb, but again, we have all of these other various passages. Let's go to Harbaim very quickly. So when we go to Harbaim, we have 11 occurrences of it, but I want to focus on this Exodus 6 passage here because of its usage. And let me go there, because this is the one where we get some definition, this Harbaim, which does, when we go there, it refers us back to Areb. But let me go back to Harbaim, which the NASB is translating as, in English, they're translating as twilight. But some of our passages, some of our translations, and now I've discovered not very many of them, but they were translating this word Harbaim as between the evenings. I do not know why. Somebody's going to have to explain to me why. In most of the literal translations, in fact, we'll go there in just a second here. But Harbaim is another word that is typically translated as twilight, evening, or between the evenings. Actually, let me go ahead and go there in the parallel versions, and we'll see that many of them now I'm finding, like here's the NIV is translating that word as twilight in the ESV. Berean Standard is twilight. Now here's Berean Literal, between the evenings. Well, I was thinking, without having looked more closely at the Hebrew lexicon or the interlinear and the Hebrew lexicon, just the way the Hebrew words are being used, I accepted the between the evenings because of the version that I was reading, the translation I was reading, and because the Berean Literal and some of the other, let me just go to the other literal translations. Here's the Literal Standard, between the evenings. Berean Literal, between the evenings. Young's Literal, between the evenings. Smith's Literal, between the two evenings. But when we get to King James, which is supposed to be a literal translation, we still have now they're saying in the evening. They're not even calling it twilight. They're calling it in the evening in the King James. In the New American Standard, they are once again calling it twilight. So I think that Harbaim, let's go back to Harbaim, and those 11 occurrences, and see how they're being translated. Harbaim. Here they are. So this one's being translated in the King James as evening, NASB as twilight, and in the interlinear as twilight. Exodus at twilight in the NASB and the interlinear. Exodus 29:39 NAS is at twilight. KJV at even, interlinear at twilight. Now here's Exodus 29:41 where they're talking about twilight in the morning. You shall offer it at twilight, offer in the morning, according to the interlinear. In the King James, thou shalt offer at evening, and shalt do it. And the NAS is you shall offer at twilight, and shall offer. So the Harbaim seems to have, let me just go on down, twilight. Except for the King James, they're using even over and over again. But the NAS and the interlinear, twilight. Interlinear, pretty much all the way through. That is holding true all the way down through all of the 11 occurrences. King James saying evening, the NAS and the interlinear, NAS and the NASB, and the interlinear, translating that word as twilight. Okay, so in summary, Areb is most commonly translated as evening, but sometimes it's translated as twilight. But when we get to Harbaim, it's primarily translated as twilight. Let's quickly, I spent way more time than I meant to on the word Areb because I'll explain in a moment. But we have the corresponding word for morning, boker, which I just want to quickly touch upon. The Bible Study Tools calls it morning, break of day, and Strong's calls it morning generally and dawn properly. Let me quickly go visit Bible Study Tools. And this particular definition from Bible Study Tools is exactly the point I'm going to get to in just a moment. Because what are they saying? Boker, what does it mean? First of all, it's a noun, it's a masculine noun, and it means morning, break of day. Well, if you look up break of day, what is break of day? When you define break of day, that is the twilight period of time. It's the entrance of sunlight into the sky, but before the sun rises. And then they go on to define morning below it as the of end of night. And I agree with that, because as soon as we get sunlight in the sky, night has ended. Of coming of daylight. I agree with that, because that's what's happening. Daylight has entered the sky, ends the night, but we have not yet reached sunrise. And then we have of coming of sunrise. And I agree with that up to the point that it is of coming up to the sunrise. But as soon as the sunrise begins, I think that the day ends, because then it goes on to say of beginning of day. That I say no to. I mean, that works in the definition of so many people, which is what my point is. We have to be careful what we're doing with the word morning here. Because when we get into the Genesis account of creation, we have, and then there was evening, and then there was morning. And morning is more specific. It is that dawn period of time. It is the daybreak period of time before the sun has risen. Because if you are saying that morning is the beginning of a day, that works contradictory to that Genesis account. Morning is the last part of the day. All right, and then they also offer this morrow, next day, next morning. Let's quickly go to Strong's. And here's the Strong's definition, where they're showing boker, meaning morning. And then they come down here and they define it a little more. And they say properly, I'm assuming that means, more specifically, it means dawn, as the break of day, which I would agree with. Dawn, if you look up the definition of dawn, is the period of time where sunlight has entered the sky, but no sun yet. It's twilight. And that is also the definition of break of day. Then generally, it's referred to as morning. And as long as you stay within the definition of dawn, that works. But as soon as you start taking morning past past sunrise, as soon as you take morning past sunrise, then you've introduced problems. It's gotten more complication. You've introduced complications. Okay, so the point of going through the Hebrew words for Areb, and all of their variations of Areb gets translated at various times as evening, twilight, between the evenings, and different things. And when you get into just the general definitions of morning out and about in the world today, it all gets very, very complicated. Unless you use the word twilight. Once you use the word twilight, it all gets very simple. No sun in the sky, but sunlight is in the sky. You have an evening twilight and you have a morning twilight. As soon as you acknowledge that, you can, if you want to call evening, that twilight in the evening, at the end of the day, evening, fine. But you then, in the discussion of how you construct a day and how you reckon a day, you have to become rather specific with it. Okay, so here's why we're spending time on the construct of a day. And that's because we have competing options for the reckoning and the order of a day. We have option one, which I'm going to say is maybe what people would start with, this idea that the daytime starts the day. So the reckoning of a day starts when we get to daytime, and I'll illustrate that in a moment, which is at the point of sunrise. I think that in this option, we've often called it a sunrise start of the day, but I really think maybe the word daytime start of the day is more accurate, because daytime begins as soon as there is sun in the sky. As soon as that sun rises or crests the horizon, we are in daytime, and we will continue in daytime until the sun disappears again. So according to this order, we would have the very first thing that happens is daytime, starting with the sun cresting the horizon in the east. And then we will go through that daytime period that I just described all the way through till the sun completely goes down in the west. So then the next thing up would be twilight in the west, which is the evening where the sun sets, but sunlight remains in the sky, and it wanes into nighttime. Following that twilight in the west, which is evening, then we have the nighttime period of time where neither sun nor its light is visible in the sky. And then that is followed with the approach of the sun, a twilight in the east that we call morning, where the sunlight begins to appear in the sky before the sun appears or rises, and it wanes into daytime. The second option, which is the one that is oftentimes being presented to us, it's being presented to us by Judaism. It's being presented to us, I think, in the Hebrew communities, like the Torah communities. I didn't mean to say Hebrew communities, but in the Torah communities, as they're referring back to Judaism, they think they're referring back to Hebrew methodologies, but Judaism is not the way it was prior to 175 BC. Another whole topic, and I've made videos on it. But this is the prevailing view amongst the understanding of Western Christianity and even within the Torah communities, and that is that twilight in the west is the start of the day. That's evening, and most will understand evening to be sunset. And this is most commonly referred to as then evening to evening. The day runs evening to evening. But technically, it's really just the twilight. The day starts with the beginning of twilight in the west, which is most commonly, the most common reference to it is evening or and also sunset. So in that chronology of this option, the very first thing that occurs is twilight in the west, evening, where the sun has set, but sunlight remains in the sky. It wanes into the nighttime. And then we have nighttime where neither the sun or the light is visible in the sky, followed by twilight in the east as the sun is reapproaching the horizon from the east. Sunlight begins to appear in the sky before the sun appears, and it wanes into daytime. And then we have the daytime, and the last part of the day is the going down of the sun, the final moment before the sun has disappeared again. Now, before I go into my illustration, I want to drive home the point that this is critical. If you're going to, in my opinion, if you're going to accept option 2, which many are, then you must be, I think you need to be consistent each time. So when you speak of evening in reference to reckoning the day and the start of the day, you're going to have to define and stick with it because it's a moment in time. If it is sunset, if literally your definition of evening is sunset, that takes place the moment the sun disappears behind the horizon and we enter twilight. So the very first thing every time is that twilight period that we're calling evening. It cannot be, because I hear it over and over again as people, especially when they're trying to visit the Passover passages of Exodus and the atonement passages, Day of Atonement passages in Leviticus, they are trying to introduce a second evening. Because they say when the evening comes down, on day 9, on the 9th day at evening, then they're wanting to call that at the end of day 9. But you really shouldn't be trying to have it both ways. I don't know how you could, because if you're going to stay with option 2, an evening to evening start, the evening, the twilight that started day 9 was the very first thing that occurred. You do not get a second evening or twilight to be a part of day 9. I call foul. You just can't do that, although it's necessary. And, it's necessary to make, in my opinion, it's necessary to make that work, especially when we get into the Day of Atonement. So I offer to people who are trying to embrace the option 2 and then employ that against the Day of Atonement discussion where we have an evening of day 9. You can't have an evening start and an evening finish to day 9. Just going to say. Let me move on to the construct of a day in an illustration. Okay, so I offer this illustration for those who are visual. At least this is my attempt to offer them something. So here we have option 2, and I maybe should have put option 1 first here, but on the left. But this would be option 2, where we have a twilight start in the evening or at sunset beginning of the day. And I would say that just pretend these little circles here are the sun. So while the sun is entirely above the horizon, that is part of the previous day, while it is partially obscured by the horizon, it's still part of the next day. When the sun has fully obscured itself behind the horizon, that is the beginning of the day. In most folks' accounting and understanding of this beginning of the day at sunset, they're starting their Sabbath when the sun goes down on Friday, and the same thing holds true for the Moedim Sabbaths. Okay, so then the very first thing in this event, in this approach, and the very first thing that everybody experiences is this twilight period of time all the way through dusk and just before the daylight just completely disappears. Once it completely disappears, we experience night where both the sun and sunlight is gone. So that's the second thing we experience. And then as the sun, here are the suns again, as it's approaching, daylight begins to fill the sky. And as soon as, while the sun is still obscured by the horizon, it's still that morning period. But the moment that it crests the horizon, we've entered a daytime period of time. So the third thing in this option that people experience is the twilight of the morning period. And then the fourth thing they experience is this daytime period of time, which is the majority of each day, each full 24-hour period of time, most days of the year, if not all days of the year. Okay, so just to reiterate, option 2, sun goes down, we first experience twilight, and then we experience nighttime, then we experience twilight, and then we experience morning. Day continues until it goes completely down. So you cannot, I don't think when you are talking about the day 9 of Leviticus 23, and you know that the sun, from evening on the 9th day, you really can't be calling that the end of the day. I think it's a foul because the 9th day started up here with the sun going down, and it was the very first event of the 9th day. To say that then we have a 9th day evening here, well, okay, evening, if you're doing that, then you are being pretty free with your definition of evening. You are not staying with the definition of Harbaim or twilight or things of that nature. You've introduced a second evening into this day, and you're going to have to introduce a period of time where the sun is still in the sky to make that work. Just saying. If you go with what I called option 1, then it appears, this would be an illustration of it. I'm sorry, terrible writing here. But here's the sun coming up while it's still, and I didn't illustrate it here, but this would be the morning period of time, the dawning period of time. The sun is in the sky, but it's the moment that it crests the horizon, breaks the horizon. You've entered daytime and the day begins. So sunrise is the beginning of this day, and we have daytime. So the very first event of the day is daytime. The second event of the day occurs as the sun is fading into the sky, into the evening, and once it fully goes down, we have the twilight in the west, which is evening, and that is the second thing that everybody experiences each day. And then the third thing they experience is that nighttime event. And then the fourth thing they experience is the twilight in the east, that is morning, dawn, daybreak, before the sun actually crests the horizon. So in option 1, with the beginning of the day starting at sunrise, you will start with the daylight period of time, sunrise, and then you'll have you'll have evening, and then you'll have nighttime, and then you'll have morning. And as I close here, let me just offer, because when you get into the creation account, what do you have? You have the activity of the day, everything that Yahweh does. In the first day, he divides light and darkness. But then there is evening, and then morning. He doesn't mention night, but he says, and there is evening, and there is morning. In day 2, he begins all the activity. And once he has finished that activity, and then there was evening, and then there was morning. He again doesn't mention night, but night is between those two evenings. We know that. And then on the third day, he gets up and we have the activity of the day. And then there is evening, and then there is morning. Evening being this twilight, and morning being the second twilight. I'll close with that. You get the idea. Well, thank you, and may you be Baruch. If you think there's any value in what I'm sharing, then please like, share, and subscribe. Thanks.